I guess probably everyone in this session knows Seamus Heaney already, but I guess, yeah, sure. Well, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1995, which was pretty amazing, and he's written some amazing poems, and one of which we will read today, Bogland, and maybe we'll touch on some others as well. We can see how it goes. But Death of a Naturalist is also one of his more famous poems, and I also really like Digging and Blackberry Picking. But we can see how we go today, and I think we'll start with Bogland and then see how much we dive into that, and if we want to dive into some of the others as well, or what happens. So I was thinking maybe we could like read the poem together first. So we could, I'll share my screen, I think. Yeah, that will work, Irene. And then I'm not yeah, maybe we can just read, I guess, like however many lines you feel kind of comfortable with, like yeah, 1 or 2 or 3, I think, and then we can just kind of take turns jumping in and go around like that. So can everyone see that? Do I need to make the font bigger?
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to zoom in a bit, and then we can always scroll through as we go.
Okay. It's just, is that good? Okay. All right, I'll start off with the first couple of lines. We have no prairies to slice a big sun at evening.
Everywhere that I sorry, that was me saying that twice. Everywhere that eye concedes to encroaching horizon.
Is wooed into the Cyclops' eye of a tarn.
Our unfenced country is bog that keeps crusting between the sights of the sun.
They've taken the skeleton of the great Irish elk.
Out of the peat, set it up, an astounding crate full of air.
Butter sunk under, more than 100 years.
Was recovered salty and white. The ground itself is kind black butter, melting and opening underfoot, missing its last definition by millions of years. They'll never dig coal here.
Only the waterlogged trunks of great firs, soft as pulp. Our pioneers keep striking inwards and downwards.
Every layer they strip seems camped on before. The bog holes might be Atlantic seepage. The wet centre is bottomless.
That was fantastic. Thank you, everybody. I think that worked really well. Does anyone want to share any initial thoughts?
Well, we could start with where the poem originated, which I think is a lovely story. Seamus was good friends with a painter and teacher called T.P. Flanagan, and previous to this poem being written, T.P. Flanagan actually painted a bogscape and dedicated it to Seamus Heaney. So the poem itself is a response to that painting, and of course Seamus then dedicated this poem to T.P. as a response. So I think that's just lovely to begin with, you know, for this poem to have been born out of such creativity.
Mm-hmm. I had a question I was gonna maybe throw in later, but you've kind of prompted me to want to put it in there now. And yeah, like there's kind of this discussion of time here, and I wonder if you all think that Seamus is more thinking about the time that has passed or the time coming in the future.
In a lot of Seamus's poetry, there's a sense of neither here nor there-ness. It's like a liminality. It's sort of a balance between the past and the future and the present, you know, and I think that this poem does both. I think it obviously discusses the past, but it certainly looks towards the future. I mean, the last line, the wet centre is bottomless there, is perfect for his view to writing more poems about the bog landscape, but also just the future of Ireland and the future in a more general sense. So I think you're right that there are definitely nods to both there.
Yeah, because I see like between the sights of the sun, like the coming up of the sun every day is like the definition of like a new time point. And then so this is just like, okay, time is for me like changing, and then there's like and then there's the reference to they'll never dig coal here. Yeah. That's, you know, this coal that's been there for the past million years. But then they'll never dig coal here is about then the future of what's going to happen in this place.
Is that a reaction because he fears this is a delicate ecosystem that's going to be lost and therefore won't ever be turned into gold because it won't be there?
Okay, that's how you read it. I read it as more of like, they'll never dig coal here. Like I won't. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a bit. Oh, that's a bit sadder.
The way
please.
Well, I see the fact that they'll never dig coal here is the fact that they can't. Our landscape isn't, you know, you just wouldn't physically be able to dig coal here. And then he goes on to say, only the waterlogged trunks of great firs, soft as pulp. That's all that you're going to get out of our landscape. So I think that's kind of what he's saying. And that also is a sort of a reference to the Irish people, I think. We're going through lots of, in the 60s and 70s especially, there was lots of upheaval, and you know, we weren't formed as a society yet, a wee bit like the soft as pulp. You know, coal's hard and it's sort of fully formed, whereas from our landscape you're not going to get that hardness or that fully formed.
And also it seems a bit, you know, every layer they strip seems camped on before, echoes that, I think, doesn't it really? And using the word strip, it sounds quite assertive, as though he doesn't like what has been happening, you know, and it is like a bit of a two fingers up, you know, every layer they strip, well, it's been camped on before, we're used to that, we can cope with it, we know what we're doing, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I think what I would really like to do is maybe I'm gonna swap my screen around, and I've highlighted some words that jumped out at me when reading the poem, and I'd like to perhaps if so we've got the words we, and then encroaching, tarn, air, butter, underfoot, missing its last definition, pioneers, wet center, and bottomless. And I wonder if we could kind of go through these, and if someone would want to like jump up and put their hand up, and as we get to each word and kind of talk about what they think, why this word is relevant in this context here in this poem. We could kind of go through it that way. So does anyone want to kick off with we? why is this a we and perhaps not an I or a you?
Could I maybe start with that one?
Please.
I think it's a unity, a sense of unity, togetherness. We're in this together. And also it's like collective memory. So as you'll know, Seamus used the bog as a symbol for Irish history and everything that has gone before us. And I think it's like a collective consciousness. And using that word we, and he goes on, and the words are and that are all used as well. So I think that for me, that's what we symbolises there.
And how broad do you think the we is? Like all of humanity, or the Irish, or?
I think that it can be read on different levels, you know. It could be read on a local level for Seamus and his local area, and then broadened out to Ireland and to the rest of Europe and other landscapes that are similar to our own, and other possibly political situations that are similar to our own. I think you could go and, you know, unpick that, or, you know, uncover the layers of that one as far as you'd like, you know.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I also had a similar feeling that this was, yeah, some kind of collective we that could be, but I guess there was some kind of like we as in we the like-minded perhaps, but not necessarily specifying who this like-minded is. And then the next word was I had to highlight was encrouching, because I'm not sure if this is a word. Has anybody heard of it before, or want to talk about perhaps its supposed meaning?
I don't know. It sounds like it. I don't know if it is an actual word, but it sounds like encroaching. And
Encrouching. Sorry, Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Sounds like encroaching, and you know so something comes near to you, but also it's crouching. So it's a bit. I don't know. It sounds a bit animalistic, doesn't it? A little bit threatening. And maybe that's part of what Roisin is talking about. And
experience of open wild land.
I think that may have been a typo on my part, but I can definitely see what you're saying. I think
I like encroaching.
But in poetry, if you can back yourself up, if you can back up your argument, then you're not really.
I love it.
Great. You've given us a whole new perspective on it there. That's
I'm going to use that word.
It was a typo, yes, Deborah. Sorry about that. My apologies.
Wow, and then I was thinking, wow, I didn't know he came up with like his own words. Yeah, I thought this means it's like, you know, like the storm is coming in, like when you say there's a really low sky or a low horizon, and this is what I imagined is like the sky crouching down.
Yeah, you should have used it, really.
It would have been a better poem.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So Deborah was asking about the date of the poem there, and Seamus Heaney wrote Bogland in 1969.
Oh, right, okay. So I mean, so at that time, peat extraction would have still been quite extensive. I mean, in Ireland, I mean,
very much so. Yeah. So the I don't know if you caught the session earlier on regendering the bogs, but the Benjamin and Rosie talked about Board Namona.
Yeah.
They were in full swing. And I think it was maybe in 1945 or so that they started, although I could be wrong there.
Yeah, so the Kyoto Protocol, which was like the first big international agreement, that was in 1992, so much later. So indeed, to be linking mining and the climate is or yeah, just like the future of humans perhaps is quite forward, very forward thinking. And okay, so then the next word that I had to look up was tarn. Does anyone want to talk about the relevance of this word?
It's a small stream running down a hillside, I would have thought. In fact, to my mind, a tarn doesn't strike me as an appropriate word for a peatland area, unless it's usage is slightly different in Ireland. I think of a bubbling brook coming down a hillside,
Yeah.
which isn't appropriate on that, I'm sure. Or is it?
Well, what I looked up, the definition said it's a small mountain lake.
Ah, right. Yeah.
I don't know if in Ireland you really
Yeah, you're right. Sorry, yes, I'm wrong. Yeah.
like up in mountain areas. You do? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
They do
definitely.
exist in other areas.
No, he's wrong.
I'm wrong. I'm sure.
Tarn is actually a Scandinavian word for a lake.
Oh, right. Ah, right.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Used in northern England and in Scotland and in Ireland for, normally lakes, mountain lakes. But also small ones in bogs sometimes. Not very often.
Yeah. Okay, so then he's creating this image of the bogland. We've got the prairie, the tarn, and what else there? Yeah. And then we go on, and then I really liked, I was really interested to see like this, an astounding crate full of air. And what does it mean when something is full of air? When something is full of what? Does anyone want to perhaps talk about that line?
What are they talking about? So it's a skeleton, isn't it? The elk is full of air.
No takers.
Maybe it's like something like a fog.
Like a fog. All right. Yeah. Okay. Because when there is like something in the air that consumes everything, that really fills up all of the air, it could be a fog, or even perhaps, a certain mood, or because what I was thinking is like when people say, "Oh, your head is full of air," it's kind of like, "Oh, there's nothing in your head. You can't think of anything. Like there's a nothingness."
To me, it means, or more so, like the idea that it's alive. It's part of it's part of Ireland. It's part of our culture.
Because it is coupled with this word astounding, which is then a very positive, warm word.
I suppose also air is associated with like the breath, so that kind of links with that of breathing and rising and falling and being alive.
That's so true. I think this aliveness and the breath is
And it could be a reference to the fog, the life, the skeleton's nearly kept in some form of life by the bog being preserved.
And also really interesting is like this movement of like, as we've learnt about a lot today, like of greenhouse gases in and out of the peatland, is it also a bit like the peatland breathing or respiring and being alive? And I'm not sure if this is what Seamus means here, but perhaps it can be encompassed in this line.
Interestingly for me, I read this very differently. I read the crates full of air to refer to the skeleton as just the ribs of a very dead animal that's been taken out of the peat and then stood up. There's just the bones. It's mostly air. It's just I suppose he might be talking about it coming back to life, but I just saw it as only the bones are left, so the body is just replaced by air.
Yeah,
hanging
I
around there in front of him.
that's right. Well, that's how I'd see it too.
It's probably both, no? Like, yeah, at the same time.
Yeah, then so it could be whatever you see in it. You know, if you that's what you see, then that's the way to take it, I think.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong answers.
Well, there are. You got it wrong.
For a typo. And then the next part I highlighted is also the last line of the next stanza. The ground itself is kind, black butter. Does anyone want to talk to butter or even black butter?
Oh, kind. Why kind?
Because it preserves. It's maybe it's peat stuff. It nourishes.
I think this might refer to cutting the peat. That in order to dig through peat is very easy compared to digging through soil, and it has the texture of butter as you almost slab-like nature of it as well. And you pick it up in your hands. It's
that's a good point. Yeah.
So
I think it might.
You're having a party.
I think it might also refer to like feeling comfortable with it. So the ground itself is kindness, as you have this feeling of kindness when you engage with it.
So like to engage with something is to build a relationship, and therefore there's a fondness or a comfort there.
But that black contrasts with the white in the previous line, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And something I thought about butter is I thought like that butter is a rich substance. Like when something is buttery, it's like a bit gluttonous almost, or it's like a luxury, or it's something really good and delicious that you add. And I thought maybe this kind of links up with that when you're mining the peat, then you're like you're doing it to take in either wealth or warmth, and in this way it's like it's providing maybe like the bread and butter to the table.
I did feature a lot in Seamus Heaney's home life. In his farmhouse, his mother churned butter once a week, and he also wrote a poem called Churning Day about that process. And butter is a big part of sort of Irish society, and I think it's a nod to cultural heritage as well. And he mentions that he remembers being told about butter being found in bogs by churchgoers, by his teachers in school. You know, that was something that wasn't really that unusual, because every summer rural communities all headed to the moss, as he called it, and as we call it here too, to dig their turf for the coming winter. So, you know, it was a sort of not a common occurrence, but it wasn't unheard of to find butter preserved by the kind, I suppose.
We've lost something. We lost Tanya, I think.
We've lost Tanya. I think that they'll be back in a second. Maybe we just...
Should we try to screen share in the meantime? Because the poem was on her screen. And see if I can...
We're going to try and locate the screen again. And then...
Will we...
Okay, so...
Okay, we're just going to try to put up the poem.
Yes, but we don't have the text, but that's fine. Okay, I'm going to just... Oh, host disabled attendee. Oh. Sorry.
Is this where we were, more or less? Yeah, right.
Norma, do you feel like taking a bit of a lead now?
Yeah, of course. So I was wondering, Roisin, if you could kind of give some insight just about bogland itself and how that kind of relates to, how bogland kind of transforms the landscape of the bog and gives an effective metaphor to communicate a sense of a living landscape, continually in process, responding to topography, changing climate, and human influence. A quote from Susan Lidstrom. I was wondering, how do you think that bogland kind of achieves this or tries to approach this?
I really like that quote. I found it when I was doing some research for this event, and it just kind of it tied in nicely with what RE-PEAT are trying to do with this event and raising the awareness about the importance of bogland and also the importance of poetry and art in general in working together for a purpose, for a common purpose. So for me, I think it goes back to this living landscape. The bogland is always changing, and so is society, and so is the way that we live our lives. And I think that the poem itself, talking about the layers that are stripped back, we can learn from our past to take us forward. So even though this poem was written in 1969, and Ireland has changed a lot since then, as you'll know, we can still learn from the past. And I think that's what the poem is saying, that it's important to keep stripping back those layers. And as someone else said earlier, even though they've been camped on before, we can't forget our past, and linking then to the future and where we go from there. The wet centre is bottomless, as I said. I think really, it is tied to the whole notion of our identity and our collective memory being there for us to discover.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think bogland, and especially both me and Shane are from the west of Ireland, and it's so inherently Irish and like built into that landscape, and it's such a connection to I think the Irish countryside. And I'm really interested to see how that kind of relationship adapts in like the face of ecological damage. But thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you. I think that he's trying to convince us too of the beauty of our country, and he talks about the encroaching horizon, and that does sound a wee bit threatening, but at the same time, it's wooed into the Cyclops eye of a town. I just think that phrase romanticises the landscape, and you think of the likes of the Prince of Ireland and how broody that it can be, and the same in the north. It's not dissimilar. So it's an appreciation for the bogland and for the country.
Yeah.
Does anyone remember any of the words that Tanya had highlighted? Maybe we could also go back to...
Underfoot, I think, was in the next sentence. Was one of the highlighted words. I don't really understand that. No, missing its last definition. Well, it's in it because it's in the peat. It's too young to become coal. Yeah. By millions of years. Yeah. Melting and opening underfoot is wonderful. Yes, that is nice.
Is the bog yielding? Is that what he's saying by melting and opening underfoot? Yeah. It's given its resources to us. Maybe that's where that's headed.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a nice combination of words. It is, isn't it?
It's interesting because it's kind of like underfoot implies this kind of like force, like this sort of like hard like pressure, and then the melting and opening is like complete opposite. So it feels kind of like this tension between like the bog being this space of like openness and then like underfoot, but somehow it doesn't, somehow it comes together, which is interesting.
Yeah, and also like there's this sort of relationship, like there's this responsiveness to the human interaction, like the human interacts and then the peatland opens itself to that, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, like the kind of real visceral feeling of going into the bog with your foot.
Yeah.
And having like being.
Last time I went to my waist in a bog, it just went. It didn't melt. It didn't melt. It didn't melt or open. It went.
But it is beautiful. It's beautiful imagery.
Trunks.
I don't really understand the use of our pioneers keep striking inwards and downwards. Are they? Who is?
Surely that's the peat cutters. Is that the peat cutters?
Well, it must be.
But why pioneers?
Well, because that's newly dug, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, the pioneers links back to the prairies, I think, for me. That's across the Atlantic.
Oh, yeah. Very good, yeah. That does tie up, doesn't it?
Is he talking about, politicians or people trying to make a change in Ireland? The Troubles were sort of coming to a head around this time, and you could, you can read politics in anything, but that's one angle you could take with it as well. We're, striking inwards and downwards. We're uncovering our past to try and help build our future, possibly.
Yeah.
But that could also relate to the ecological nature of the bog as well.
Roisin, do you know, like, if Seamus would often sort of get a bit political in his poems?
I think it was unavoidable. He found, from what I can, from what I would know of sort of watching interviews and things with him, he was not forced into writing about politics, but he couldn't do wrong for doing right, if you know what I mean. It was trying to score points, so he found that a very tricky thing to navigate when he was writing. If there are quite a few really interesting interviews, which nearly every interviewer asks Seamus that particular question about writing about the Troubles, and he says like different things each time. I think it was hard for him to he didn't want to be known as someone that was a Troubles poet or a political poet. But again, growing up where he did and in the time that he did, it was difficult to avoid.
I was just thinking that if this is referring back to the pioneers, is referring back to the wide horizons, and maybe presumably that's a reference maybe to America, and I guess maybe comparing he's thinking about Irish people at home trying to make new lives for themselves compared to people in America, where there's as well as the wide horizons of the landscape, there's it's a new life that you can make for yourself, and there's many possibilities, whereas when you come from an ancient culture, there's thousands and thousands of years, layer upon layer of things which you keep coming back to. However you try and change, those things bring you back, and you get embroiled in old.
And then, as Addy points out,
Yeah, and it becomes very inward looking necessarily.
Yeah.
And as Addy points out, you've got the American link and the Atlantic seepage as well.
Yeah.
People going across the Atlantic to America.
The wet centre of
Does anyone want to make a comment on the last section of the poem?
Yeah, I think with the Atlantic seepage, what he means is basically he just tries to, you know, when we look at the bog, he tries to widen it somehow, you know, metaphysically, as if it's like a big ocean and it has, you know, it's very deep, and as if it's like it's actually Atlantic Ocean, you know, in a sense. So it's kind of like this, gives feeling of something large, something wide.
And this poem was the last poem of Seamus's collection called Door into the Dark. So the wet centre is bottomless for me. Also, I think relates to his own creativity. It maybe sounds a bit boasting that he's saying that the wet centre is bottomless, that he has more to give, I think. The next collection then goes on to explore more bog poetry and to talk about the bog bodies of P.V. Gloob. I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure, of his books. So I think it's like a nod to what's to come.
That mention as well about the wet centre being bottomless. The last poem in his first collection, Personal Helicon, ends with him looking into a well, and he describes his sort of mission, I suppose, as a poet, as being to, he says, I rhyme to see myself, to set the darkness echoing. So this, again, this image of this deep center, and like you mentioned, Roisin and Norma, and I suppose like everyone has been speaking about the sort of this sense of immortality that can exist, and mining history through memory and myth. And for me, the first line, "We have no prairies," is a real link to Sailing to Byzantium by Yeats, which starts with that famous line, "There is no country for old men." And in that poem, Yeats is also kind of talking about achieving this immortality, essentially, and kind of how the soul can divorce from the physical body and achieve something which is eternal, also through art, which I think is quite intentional in that first line. And for me, just ties in nicely again with what everyone's been saying about this sense of continued history and digging and a sort of an infinity that exists in a really beautiful way. That the image as well of the great Irish elk, like Norma said, maybe being full of, and somebody else mentioned, being full of breath, possibly air being breath, and also the great fur is now soft pulp. You know, this just changing relationship between the land, the landscape, what it sees, what it consumes, what it holds, what it inspires. So yeah, I also think that the wet centre being bottomless is a really beautiful, hopeful statement.
I agree.
Jane, that was a very nice way to end. Very, very poetic in your analysis.
Good.
Thank you, everyone. This was so nice. I don't know how we just suddenly started hosting the session. Tanya disappeared. Have a really nice evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are.
Yeah, and thanks, Roisin, for all your knowledge and insight.
Thanks all of you.
Thank you
very much. It's been lovely to see you all and talk to you all. Good luck with the rest of the festival.
Thank you.
Good luck, Frankie.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.